A proper difficulty curve in games is often quite a tricky part to execute properly. Unless a game designer intentionally gears the difficulty toward a certain level, it can be jarring when the game suddenly becomes much more easier or difficult in comparison to what came before. This is especially true in case of boss battles, which often are a highlight of the game. In this video, I would like to talk about one of those cases when it was done really well. Library of Ruina is a turn-based card game in which your goal is to collect books by beating up increasingly stronger enemies. While to the premise there is much more than meets the eye, it isn't subject for this video. To make things clear, I want to give a brief explanation on how the combat works. Unlike in most turn-based games, the characters do not wait to execute their move, but rather they clash with each other, and whoever rolls higher on dice rolls determines who comes out on top. Another important element of the combat is the light bar. If you are familiar with TCGs to some extent, this is essentially a resource used by players to play cards. The combat is all about resource management and picking up the best possible clashes during your turn. Now, the interesting thing is that the subject of this video acts as a true test on how well the player understands the core mechanics introduced up to this point. Firstly, let's get over this game's structure. There are three types of encounters player can engage with: main story fights, optional fights, and abnormality fights. Queen of Hatred belongs to the abnormality fight category, which are type of boss fights with their own share of unique gimmicks that, after completing, rewards players with new abilities related to that abnormality. Important thing to note here is those fights often play differently in comparison to others I just mentioned, and Queen of Hatred is no exception. Now, let's make a quick roundup of her quirks and see what makes her a step up from previous abnormality fights. 1. She possesses no weaknesses to any type of damage and is very difficult to stagger. 2. Marks a target every 2 turns, making them take extra damage while also making them a priority target. 3. The player has to match a special meter, and in case they won't, very likely they're screwed. 4. It's the fight where the game introduces AoE attacks, which are going to become stable in the future. Now, here's what previous bosses have. As you can see, there are many ways things could go south if player is unprepared. And if they beat abnormality fights as soon as they unlock, the chances are they will get caught off guard. Another sign of her being caught above the rest is her danger level. Let me explain. Each abnormality has an assigned danger level. Going from the least to most dangerous, those are Zain, Tef, He, Vav, and Aleph. Queen of Hatred is under the Vav category, which is the second highest rank possible. So it makes sense as to why this fight has more stuff going for it. It's further exemplified by the music, demonstrating the gravity of the situation. Unlike in previous abnormality fights, where it was giving a more eerie vibe, here the music is intense with alarm sounds in the background. Letting the player know that things got real. Normally, a sudden difficulty spike like this could end up being a source of frustration. Thankfully, at this point in the game, the player has some amount of wiggle room. Up until now, the player had to clear all main story and abnormality fights in order to increase the rank. Upon reaching Urban Plague level, while players still have to beat all main story fights, after unlocking Queen of Hatred, from that point onward, player can postpone those fights to later in case they think they are unable to beat the abnormality. This was a great choice from the game design standpoint, as it presented a challenging encounter for those familiar with the fundamentals, while allowing to skip it until later for those who still struggle. Because it can be postponed, there is no fear that it will suddenly become a roadblock, and in case a player wants to tackle the challenge, as long as they understand how combat works, it can certainly be one of the most enjoyable battles in the game to figure out. Making a difficulty curve feel right is often a grueling task. Anytime game designer wants to raise difficulty, they have to be extra careful while doing so. Queen of Hatred is a case that comes to my mind when talking about difficulty spikes done right. Hell, many players consider her as one of the most memorable fights from that game, which is a feat on its own considering how stacked the roster of later bosses is. This will be it for this video. I hope all of you will have a great day.